Good evening and welcome. Tonight I'm going to be reading to you from this book about the Byzantine Empire. This book is part of my Viewer's Choice series, the time of year where my subscribers pick which topics I get to read about. This one was chosen by Gigrox, who loves the Eastern Roman Empire. So that is tonight's topic. Also, just a side note that in America we say Byzantine, and I know most of the English-speaking world says Byzantine or Byzantine. Just so you know, I'm aware that I'm pronouncing it weird. That's how we say it in America for whatever reason, like with zebras and stuff. But let's get into it. Let's read about the Byzantine Empire. Chapter 1, Rome moves east. Black smoke mingled with the dust of crushed stone as cannonballs erupted through the city walls. The double walls of Constantinople had held strong for most of the past 1,000 years, but the empire had weakened over the centuries. Emperor Constantine XI wondered whether this would be the final siege. The Ottoman Turks had been bombarding the city for nearly 2 months, and its citizens, trapped behind the walls, were sick and starving. But if Constantinople were to fall, it would mean the end of an empire. It would mean that the dream of Constantine I, the first emperor of Byzantium, was not fulfilled. His dream of a Christian empire bridging east and west was over. As ball after ball broke through the walls and enemy soldiers streamed through, Constantine XI, the 81st emperor of this once vast empire, again rallied his troops against the Ottoman Turks. There is much more than just the city at stake. One of the last surviving direct links to the ancient world was under attack. When the Byzantine Empire fell to the Ottoman Turks in 1453, it was the end of an important but poorly recognized period of world history. When we think of the time period from the 4th century through the 15th century, we usually think of Western Europe struggling in the Dark Ages. The Roman Empire, which flourished at the beginning of the 1st century, had preserved and expanded upon the knowledge and culture of the ancients. But when invading Germanic tribes ended its reign, the light of knowledge dimmed for 1,000 years. At least that is the story commonly known, but it is not entirely true. In actuality, the Roman Empire didn't collapse entirely. It moved east, where it nurtured religion, centralized government and law, and developed music, art, philosophy, mathematics, and other areas of scholarship. While Western Europe was often in the dark, in the East the light continued to shine. The story of the rise of Byzantium starts with the decline in importance of the city of Rome. In 293 CE, facing the invading Germanic hordes, the rulers of the Roman Empire decided to change the way the empire was governed. Instead of being ruled from Rome by a single emperor, the empire was divided into eastern and western regions, each to be governed by a separate emperor who in turn had help from a deputy emperor. Diocletian, who led the empire from 248 to 305, was the ruler of the eastern territories and governed from a city in what today is Turkey. When he voluntarily retired in 305, and the Western Empire died the following year, this scheme collapsed. Constantine, son of the former emperor of the West, emerged as the strongest claimant to power. Over the next 18 years, he managed to defeat the other rulers and take control of the entire empire. Like Diocletian, Constantine decided to live in the eastern part of the Roman world. He set about finding a new capital city, a city that would work more effectively than the old Rome in the empire he was determined to rebuild and to transform. He chose a city named Byzantium. A Greek named Byzas had founded Byzantium in the mid-600s BCE. The Delphic oracle, the seer of Greek legend, had guided him to establish the city. About 1,000 years later, Constantine was supposedly guided by a dream to choose the location for his new capital. He renamed the city Constantinople, which means City of Constantine. It was also known as New Rome. The site had many features that made it an attractive capital and center of trade. Located on a peninsula between the Aegean Sea and the Black Sea, it was a very defensible location. It was also ideally situated for commerce. It was a crossroads for trade routes between Europe and Asia and linked African routes. Because of its strategic location for trade, Constantinople was a very cosmopolitan city, and it grew quickly. People from various parts of the world were drawn to the city and could be found mingling in its markets. But in the eastern provinces of the empire, Greek culture overlay the heritage of many ancient cultures, so Constantinople, like Byzantium before it, was at heart a Greek city. Although Latin was the official language until the 6th century, the citizens of Constantinople, as well as most of the rest of the empire, spoke Greek. But they considered themselves, as did everyone in the empire, to be Romans. It is only in modern times that the Roman Empire in the East has come to be known as the Byzantine Empire. Like the Roman Empire that preceded it, the Byzantine Empire was so large that its borders were difficult to defend. During its history of more than 1,000 years, the empire's territory included parts of 34 present-day countries in Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. Over the centuries, the empire did its best to defend itself against many invaders who wanted to gain territory or plunder the riches of Constantinople. Turks, Persians, Arabs, Bulgars, and even Christian crusaders were some of the groups waging war against the Byzantines. During that time, the Byzantine borders contracted and expanded. But Byzantium grew ever smaller until 1453, when the Ottoman Turks breached the city's double walls to capture Constantinople, which at that point was nearly all that remained of the empire. Today, Constantinople is called Istanbul, and it is a thoroughly modern city in Turkey. Islam has replaced Christianity as the guiding religion. But the city is still a bridge between Europe and Asia, and because so many traditions persist from Byzantine times, it is also a bridge to the past. Constantine's decision in the 4th century to base his empire in Byzantium has profoundly shaped our world in the 21st century. Much of what we think and believe today is founded on knowledge and ideas that came from ancient Greece. If the Byzantines had not preserved that classical knowledge and continued the intellectual advancement, much of the knowledge would certainly have been lost. The cultural and intellectual flowering of the Renaissance in Europe might never have happened. The Byzantine Empire is responsible for shaping our world in another way as well. This empire is responsible for the rise of Christianity. In 330, when Constantine moved his capital to the east, Christianity had a devoted but small collection of followers. In Rome and elsewhere, Christians were persecuted and even killed as entertainment in gladiatorial and animal fights. After Constantine's conversion to Christianity in 312, he gave it the same legal status as other faiths. Eventually, Christianity would become the official religion of the empire, and would influence all of its political dealings. Chapter 2, nice segue, an empire of Christ. Before the reign of Constantine, the Roman Empire was no place to be a Christian. Churches were routinely burned, and Christians were subject to all sorts of persecution and torture. They were burned at the stake, forced to take part in gladiatorial contests, and thrown to the lions for the amusement of audiences, and they suffered many other horrible fates. In 311, Emperor Gelasius gave Christians the right to practice their religion and to rebuild their churches without interference. But Christianity was only tolerated, that is, until Constantine gained sole power in 324. Constantine had not always been a Christian. Like most of the populace, he practiced polytheism. He worshipped such Roman deities as Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and especially Apollo, the sun god. But in 312, when he was fighting to wrest control of the empire from his co-rulers, he had a vision. According to legend, he saw a cross and heard a voice from heaven that told him, "In this sign, conquer." He adopted the Christian faith and went on to defeat his rivals and take control of the empire. During Constantine's rule, Christianity began to be actively supported. As a result, the religion flourished and spread. It also became part of the political landscape. The Byzantine Empire became a theocracy in the sense that Christian values and ideals were the foundation of the empire's political ideals and heavily entwined with its political goals. In fact, the old religious practice of polytheism, the belief in more than one god or many gods, was eventually outlawed in 392. The emperor was believed to be the representative of God on earth and a counterpart to Jesus Christ. He was believed to be chosen by God himself and so to rule by divine right. As such, he occupied a key role not only in the affairs of state, but also in the church. But the emperor could not decide matters of belief by himself, and attempts to impose his authority in other religious matters often led to controversy and conflict. As the political and religious center of the empire, Constantinople came to be known as the New Jerusalem. The city was full of holy relics, and many of its coins had Jesus' face on them. Part of Byzantium's political power came from the fact that the majority of its citizens held the same set of religious beliefs, something that helped to strengthen and satisfy the empire. Over time, most Christians came to agree upon a standard set of beliefs that were thought to be correct or orthodox. In response to serious disagreements between various groups of Christians, a series of meetings among church leaders, known as councils, established what those beliefs were to be. The First Council of Nicaea in 325 determined such issues as the relationship of Jesus Christ to God the Father and the proper date of Easter. The council also was responsible for writing the first part of the Nicene Creed, a Christian profession of faith that is still used in church liturgy today. Over the next 400 years, 6 more councils followed to clarify and codify other issues of belief. During the 500 or so years that followed the loss of Byzantine political control in the old Roman West, a number of differences developed in the practice and beliefs of Christians in these regions. Some concerned cultural issues, such as whether to use Latin or Greek in services, or whether priests should be married or wear beards. Others involved matters of authority. Who should be the leader of the church, the pope or the council of bishops? And doctrine, which is the relation of Father, Son, and Spirit in the Holy Trinity. By 1054, awareness of these differences had grown, and the rift between East and West was formalized. The Eastern Church separated from the Western Church in a split known as the Schism, and this division hardened over the next 2 centuries. These 2 branches of Christianity persist today, with more than 1 billion people worldwide practicing Roman Catholicism, mostly in Western Europe and the Americas, and as many as 30 million people practicing Orthodox Christianity, largely in Eastern Europe and Russia. Chapter 3: Intellectual Achievements. Though we primarily credit the Byzantines with preserving classical learning during the Middle Ages, they also made important intellectual and artistic contributions of their own in a number of areas. One of the notable achievements of Byzantine society was in the area of law. The Byzantines highly valued the rule of law. When Emperor Justinian came to power in 527, one of his primary concerns was understanding and organizing the vast body of laws the empire had inherited from the Romans. He appointed a committee to tackle this project. The result was a coherent and consistent set of laws, both old and new, called the Code of Justinian. Scholars consider this legal code to be one of the most significant accomplishments of the emperor's reign. Justinian also wanted to use the law to uphold the teachings of Jesus Christ. He made sure his code included new laws that improved the circumstances of traditionally powerless or disadvantaged groups, such as women, slaves, and debtors. Not all laws in the Code of Justinian were designed to help people. Some were designed to punish. The death penalty was rarely applied, but when a criminal was executed, it was a public spectacle. Many crimes were punished with blinding or the loss of hand, nose, or tongue. The Code of Justinian called for some brutal punishments by today's standards, but at the time it was considered a humane collection of laws that could be applied fairly and without confusion. The Byzantines were an educated, literate society, and they produced an impressive amount of literature. Although most of it was religious, there were also histories, encyclopedias, secular poetry, and books of fiction and nonfiction. Some humor writing reveals that the Byzantines had a taste for simple jokes and puns. Literary forms and writing styles could be traced back to ancient Greek models. The printing press would not be invented until the 15th century, so books in Byzantine times were copied by hand. Usually this work was completed by ordinary scribes, but sometimes, and especially in the case of religious works, it was done by monks. They copied important manuscripts in special rooms called scriptoria. The empire had many monasteries, and they were powerful forces in Byzantine cultural life, often supported by the nobility or members of the imperial family. In medieval Western Europe, learning came to be associated entirely with the church and its monasteries. But in the Byzantine world, this was not the case. Education, especially at higher levels, was something pursued primarily in the secular world. The Byzantines valued education, and many citizens of the empire were well educated. Many men received a good education, including members of the middle class. Some women were educated too, but not as many, nor was their education quite so good. Usually only upper-class women could read and write. Much education was directed at enabling people to speak well in public, or to do work in the vast administrative system of the empire. But some Byzantines were accomplished scientists working in fields such as mathematics, astronomy, botany, or medicine. Music is considered one of the Byzantines' chief cultural achievements. Byzantine music that remains today is exclusively religious in nature. Sacred music was written for the voice alone. Instruments such as lyres, horns, flutes, and drums were used in secular music, but they were not considered appropriate for religious use. Chants and hymns that originated during the Byzantine period are still used in Orthodox church services around the world. The enduring religious tradition has kept this music alive. All of the secular music has been lost to time, although echoes of it may still be heard in the folk music of Greece and Turkey. The Byzantines' crowning achievements were in the areas of art and architecture. The Byzantines lavished much of their artistic skill on their churches. The Byzantine churches were characterized by a large central dome, which made worshippers inside feel as if they could look up into heaven. The interiors were decorated with frescoes and mosaic art. Artists often covered entire walls with scenes from the Bible, as well as depicting scenes from the reigns of emperors. The Byzantines adopted a consistent, rather stylized form of artistic representation to suggest the holiness of the subjects. These stylized human forms were also easier to create using mosaics, the Byzantines' most famous method of artistic expression. Small squares of cut glass, stone, or other material were pressed into plaster to create elaborate pictures and designs. These mosaics, often with gold backgrounds, adorned the walls and domes of churches and palaces throughout the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantines also created a more personal kind of art in the form of portable icons. These were religious images painted on wooden panels that were displayed not only in the churches, but also in private homes, where they may have been parts of household shrines. They were often part of ceremonial processions, both religious and military. Byzantine artists also worked with gold and gems to create beautiful containers for Constantinople's many holy relics. Called reliquaries, these containers held items of religious significance, such as bones of saints or wood that supposedly was from the cross on which Jesus was crucified. As one might expect in a culture so central on religion, the majority of Byzantine art that survives was made for sacred purposes. Most secular art and architecture has perished with time, although the magnificent walls of Constantinople still stand. Chapter 4: Town and Country. Life in the Byzantine Empire differed greatly based on whether an individual lived in the city or the country, and based on personal wealth and social standing. Life in Constantinople was very cosmopolitan for its time. Because the city was the administrative center of the empire and important to trade, residents of Constantinople and visitors were ethnically and culturally diverse. Docks were crowded with all sorts of boats, while the streets teemed with a variety of people, including Scandinavians, Egyptians, North Africans, and Persians. Because of its role as a meeting place between East and West, Constantinople dominated the world market. Byzantine merchants and other traders imported products from as far away as Iceland, Ethiopia, northern Russia, Sri Lanka, and China. Shops displayed luxury goods such as silks, gold jewelry, ivory carvings, fine leather, perfumes, decorative glass, and ceramics. The city was the center of almost all commerce, and it prospered by receiving, refining, and re-exporting the goods that passed through its markets. Constantinople grew quickly. The city had double walls and moats and was one of the best fortified cities in the world at the time. Constantinople reached its cultural and economic peak in the 6th century under Emperor Justinian I. At this time, the population of the city is estimated to have been about 500,000. The life of the city centered on three great structures or groups of buildings: the Hippodrome, the Hagia Sophia, and the Great Palace. The buildings represented the three main elements of the Byzantine world: the people, the church, and the emperor. The buildings enclosed the main public square, the Augusteum. The Hippodrome was an enormous open-air arena used for public entertainment such as chariot races, armed combat, and wild animal shows. It was also where criminals were publicly punished, and the public turned out in droves to see them paraded, beaten, maimed, or killed. Measuring 1,477 feet, or 450 meters long, by 427 feet, or 130 meters wide, the Hippodrome could seat more than 60,000 spectators. A typical day in the arena might include as many as 25 chariot races, with performances by acrobats, jugglers, musicians, and dancers between events. Events at the Hippodrome were the city's most popular entertainment. Now, one second, I'm going to read you this box. Normally I don't read the boxes, but this comes up later, and I feel like context is important. Let's read about the Nika riots. The Byzantines are avid sports fans, and thousands attended chariot races at the Hippodrome. The teams of charioteers were named after the colors they wore, blue and green, and each team was associated with a political party. In 532, tensions was high over dissatisfaction with the emperor. The two groups were feeling particularly hostile, both against each other and against the government in general. Tensions came to a head when the crowd in the Hippodrome got out of control and went on a 5-day rampage. The crowd demanded that the Emperor Justinian be replaced. Shouting Nika, which means win, they used to cheer on the charioteers. They burned and destroyed much of the city, including the old church of Hagia Sophia. Emperor Justinian called in the military to put down the uprising. He ended the riots and weakened the power of the blues and greens, but his victory came at a great cost. He regained control of his empire, but 30,000 lives were lost in the Hippodrome in the process. Continuing on. The Church of Hagia Sophia, Greek for Holy Wisdom, was another cornerstone of Constantinople. The great building that still stands today is the third church of that name constructed on the site. There it is. Today, at least. The first church was initially built by Constantine's son in 360, but it was destroyed in 404 during a period of violent rioting. The second church also burned during the Nika Revolt in 532. But by 537 it had been magnificently rebuilt by architects employed by Justinian. Although its dome collapsed during an earthquake in 558, it was restored and made larger and stronger than ever. Today, more than 1,400 years after its construction, the The Church of Hagia Sophia is still believed by many to be one of the most beautiful buildings in the world. It is a spectacular example of Byzantine architecture, with a splendid dome that rises to 160 feet, or 49 meters. Its vast interior was filled with elaborate mosaics and decorations made of colored marbles, stone, and gold. Byzantium's most important ceremonies took place inside Hagia Sophia, and people felt that visiting it was like experiencing heaven on earth. Next to Hagia Sophia and across the Augusteum from the Hippodrome was the Great Palace. It was a vast complex of buildings containing living quarters, dining halls, reception rooms, churches, and recreational spaces. It also had libraries, a polo ground, gardens, a swimming pool, and prisons. Apart from a few ruined walls, none of these buildings still stands, but in Byzantine times the palace complex was central to the empire. It functioned not only as the emperor's residence, but also as the hub of the administration that ran the Byzantine world. It included offices, meeting rooms, the mint, garrisons, armories, and all kinds of workshops. In addition to its grand churches and palaces, Constantinople benefited from many innovations that were unknown in Western Europe for most of this period. For example, the city's water came in by means of aqueducts from outlying hills and was stored in large underground cisterns. There was even a sewage system. Many regulations governed building, trade, and safety matters. Constantinople was the glittering jewel in the crown of Byzantium, but other significant towns and cities flourished at various times. Among them were Alexandria, Antioch, Corinth, Ephesus, Mistra, Philadelphia, Thessaloniki, and Trebizond, many of which were along the coasts. Most of what we know about the Byzantine Empire comes from writers who lived in the cities, but most people in the empire lived close to the land. The economic life of rural Byzantium was based on agriculture, craft, and commerce. Citizens lived in small villages and owned fields, vineyards, or orchards that they worked themselves or leased to tenants. They prized self-sufficiency, and families were largely able to provide for their own needs. They grew fruit and vegetables, milled grain, wove cloth, made baskets, and created candles. When they could, they sold some of their handicrafts in the town market to make extra money for the family. And if they could afford it, they kept a few animals for meat and dairy foods and to do the heavy work in the fields. But owning land was the primary source of wealth, and the major rural landowners, whether secular lords, military leaders, or bishops and abbots in the church, were key players in society. Chapter 6, Expansion and Contraction. Although the Byzantine Empire was a stable state compared with much of Western Europe during the Middle Ages, its borders expanded and contrasted throughout its history as territory was gained and lost. The empire came into existence because of the threat to the Western Roman Empire that was posed by invading Germanic tribes. Over the next 1,000 years, invaders from Persia, the Arab world, Italy, Bulgaria, Central Asia, and elsewhere sought to gain control of parts of the empire for themselves. Constantinople was a particular prize, given its great wealth and strategic location for trade. In the 6th and early 7th centuries, with political power in Western Europe almost entirely lost, the empire's main foe was the Persians. Battles were fought for 100 years, with each side alternately winning and losing. But just when it seemed the Byzantines were finally victorious, a new and even stronger opponent appeared. After the Prophet Muhammad died in 632, Arab armies looked to expand the Islamic world in every direction. The Byzantine Empire lost all its territory in what today are Syria, Palestine, and Egypt. The area they had fought over with Persia came under the control of Muslim Arabs as well. The empire also faced many invaders from Eastern Europe and the grassy plains of Central Asia. Slavic peoples moved into the Balkans with their Bulgar overlords from the 6th century and fought against the Byzantine Empire. By 1018, however, they were finally defeated and had been converted to Christianity. Their territory also absorbed into the empire. Later in that century, Normans from northern France defeated the Byzantines to take territory in southern Italy, while the Seljuk Turks took control of much of what is Turkey today. In 1095, Emperor Alexius I asked the Pope, Urban II, for help in driving off the Muslim Seljuk Turks. His request led to the beginning of the Crusades, a series of expeditions sent by the Roman Catholic Church over the next 200 years to recapture the Holy Lands in the Middle East, including the holy city of Jerusalem, from the Muslims. The expedition, now known as the Fourth Crusade, was launched in 1202. Instead of taking the Holy Land, however, the Crusaders ended up besieging Constantinople. 2 years later, in 1204, they had captured the city, looted its treasures, destroyed many of its buildings, and set up their own version of the empire in some former Byzantine territories. These areas were now ruled by European lords. Although the Western powers could not maintain their hold on these territories, and the Byzantines recovered Constantinople in 1261, this was a blow from which the empire never fully recovered. But it wasn't long before another powerful threat reared its head, one that would be the greatest and last. The Ottomans, another Muslim Turkish people, gained power during the 1300s and gradually took over the remaining shreds of the Byzantine Empire. The empire was racked by almost constant civil wars, and by 1400, little of the empire was left besides Constantinople. But still the Byzantines clung to power in their capital. In 1453, however, the Ottomans had the city surrounded by land and sea, and were ready to make their final assault. They bombarded Constantinople's great double walls using their newly invented cannons. The citizens continued to resist, despite being weakened and much reduced in number by disease and starvation. But after nearly 2 months of constant bombardment, the Ottomans finally breached the city walls. With Constantinople in their hands, they quickly began establishing a new empire in the ruins of the old. They transformed the Christian city to suit their Muslim faith. Hagia Sophia and many other churches were converted to mosques. A great new mosque, the Blue Mosque, you can see up there, it's so beautiful, was built on the ruins of the old imperial palace, while the Sultan built himself a new palace, today called Topkapi Palace. Constantinople, renamed Istanbul, the city of Islam, became the capital of a vast new empire stretching from southeastern Europe through the Near East to North Africa. The Ottoman Empire ruled for nearly 500 years, until the country of Turkey was formed from its wreckage in 1923. Today, with a population close to 14 million, Istanbul is the largest city in Turkey and still an important bridge between East and West. And Chapter 6, our Byzantine heritage. The Byzantine Empire played a vital role in shaping the course of history and culture in both the East and the West. Constantine had established Christianity as a dominant religious force. Throughout the centuries, when European society and culture was in disorder, the Byzantine Empire preserved the faith as the foundation of its political ideals and kept intellectual life vigorous. In doing so, it blocked Islam from spreading into Europe. Had Islam spread, it would have dramatically changed the future for Europe and for the New World, which was yet to be revealed to Europeans. It is interesting to wonder how the Western world might be different today had Byzantium not existed or survived for more than 1,000 years. How might things be different today had missionaries not spread the growing faith and monasteries not preserved the religious rituals of Orthodox Christianity? And what might have happened had the Byzantines not preserved the intellectual heritage of the Greeks? What knowledge might have been lost? And how would that have changed the way we think today? The Byzantines' preservation of classical knowledge contributed significantly to the flourishing of the culture that was the Renaissance. The Byzantine Empire kept the life of ancient Greece and Rome, transformed and re-energized by the Christian faith, shining while Western Europe struggled through the Dark Ages. So much of what the West is today comes from the fact that for 1,000 years in the East, there was a golden empire now known as Byzantium. That's the end of our book for tonight. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you found this video relaxing and educational. And I hope that you have a good